Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Today's episode is all about developers. Peter Bushnell, lead developer of Feathercoin, tells us how Feathercoin puts the fun back in cryptocurrencies, their growing community, and their big plans for the future. Then Stephanie and Andreas join me for the conclusion of our conversation on the potential for microtransaction-powered business models, followed up by a chat with Alan Reiner, the lead developer of Armory Wallet, who helps me understand the potential of a new technique called microbilling. But first, Stephanie Murphy caught up with Bitcoin lead Gavin Andresen on the show floor at Bitcoin 2013 last month. They discuss origins, expectations, projects, and pitfalls. Enjoy the show.
All right, talking with Gavin Andresen. He's the lead developer for Bitcoin. Hi, Gavin.
Hi.
So you, I guess on a personal note to start out with, you live in Massachusetts, is that right?
Yeah, I do. I live in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Okay, I went to college at UMass Amherst, so I'm very familiar with that area.
Oh, good. Did you take any geology courses?
No, I didn't. I was biochemistry major.
My wife's a geology professor there, which is why we're there.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I really like the area. As someone who's very anti-war, personally myself, there were always peace demonstrations, even almost 10 years ago when I was an undergraduate. So do you like living there?
Yeah, Amherst is a great place to live. I have 2 kids. It's a wonderful place to raise kids. It's a college town, so there's always interesting things happening there. Highly recommend it.
Cool. So I first found out about you a couple years ago because I remember, had lunch with Ian and Mark, my colleagues at Free Talk Live, and you were trying to sell them on the idea of this Bitcoin thing, and they were like, what the hell is this Bitcoin thing? But this guy wants to meet us for lunch. Okay, we'll listen to him. So do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, I remember that lunch. Yeah, I drove up to Keene and met with Ian and Mark, who were late, if I recall. We had a very nice lunch, and I talked about this crazy experiment called Bitcoin that was just starting to become interesting. And if I recall correctly, Mark paid for my lunch and I paid him in Bitcoin.
Oh, cool. I bet he's happy with that now.
Yeah, I think if he kept them, and you could ask him if he kept them, then, it turned out to be a pretty good deal for him.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you first, get involved with Bitcoin? What was your story from the very beginning?
Sure. Well, I was actually looking around for an interesting project to get involved in, and I'd talked to a couple of friends in Amherst about potential startup businesses, and nothing really stuck. But while I was in the process of doing that, I've done startup businesses in the past, I stumbled across this really interesting open source project called Bitcoin. I just saw a link to a blog that was talking about it. It caught my interest. I've been interested in economics and cryptography and peer-to-peer technologies, and so I read everything I could about it. Back then, you could actually read everything pretty much that had ever been written about Bitcoin because it was still pretty small. This was in May of 2010.
Okay, yeah.
And then I did the simplest possible project I could possibly think of just to, I'm a programmer, so I got to try it to see if it will work and get my feet wet with it, which was this website that became famous called the Bitcoin Faucet.
Yes, I remember that. And it was giving away 5 Bitcoins or something.
When we started, I spent $50 whole and bought 10,000 Bitcoins.
Oh my gosh.
Back then you could buy for $50, and then I gave them away 5 at a time.
Did that change over time? Did it get less?
Oh yeah, as the Bitcoin price went up, I had to decrease it repeatedly because it turns out if you give away more than a certain amount, it becomes profitable for people to try to really cheat it and get more than their fair share.
Right. So that's really interesting. So you started the Bitcoin Faucet, and that was your first Bitcoin project. And then when did you start working on the code?
It was actually right around that same time. I started to communicate with Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, and started to help out with maintenance of the code, submit improvements to the code, and that became just basically my full-time job. That was all I was doing it as a volunteer for the open source project. Mm-hmm. Got sucked in kind of deeper and deeper.
So you caught the bug from the very beginning. You caught the Bitcoin bug. What did you see as a potential back in 2009, was it?
2010 when I heard of it. Yeah.
So back in 2010, what did you see as the potential for Bitcoin, or did you not really know but thought it was really exciting? What were you thinking as far as the future?
Well, I thought that there was a small possibility that it would become really, really, really big. And, working on things that have a potential of becoming really, really big. That's kind of the definition of an entrepreneur who's interested in big ideas.
Right.
And so it's actually become much bigger, much quicker than I expected. So, we have over 1,000 people here at this conference. If you'd asked me back in 2010 if there'd be a Bitcoin conference, attracting over 1,000 people, I would have laughed at you and said, no, it's going to take at least 5 or 10 years before we get to that level of interest. But no, it's really exceeded my expectations.
And you said you were interested in economics before this. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, I'm mostly a libertarian. I say mostly because I'm not all the way a libertarian, but...
What are your sticking points? Just curious.
I do think there's a role for government. I even think that there might be a bit of a role of realizing that people can be lucky and make a lot of money. And, maybe there is a role for taking some of the money that people make merely because they're lucky and maybe heard about Bitcoin when it was really early, and giving that to people who maybe weren't so lucky. So I kind of do believe in a minimal social safety net, which will probably set me apart.
You did that voluntarily.
I did with the Bitcoin faucet, right? And that was the idea of spreading.
You didn't need a government to tell you have to do it.
They didn't, and I think you could have a completely voluntary system, but I think there'd be a long way to get there.
Yeah, it's a little apprehensive. Did you know that I'm going to moderate a panel tomorrow about nonprofits using Bitcoin, and we're here with 3 nonprofit organizations today, talking about why Bitcoin is great for nonprofits and nonprofits are great for Bitcoin too, because it shows that, that this does have totally charitable, legitimate uses used
Absolutely.
To help people. So.
Yeah, I love seeing people using, Bitcoin to do good. It's great for Bitcoin. It's great for the world.
It really lowers the barrier for entry for charities as well, because, starting up Free Aid, which is a volunteer first aid organization that I work with, we had to register for all these bank accounts, and PayPal locked down our account twice for seemingly no reason. And, we really started to see the value of Bitcoin right away, because that just can't happen with Bitcoin. And there's transparency built in too, because you can audit the blockchain anytime you want. You can see what Bitcoins we have and where we pay them out to. I guess you'd have to know whose addresses we're paying them out to, but you can see what we have and our assets on hand. So I think that's really valuable for a charity to have that available and that kind of transparency built in. Tell me more about your interest in economics. I don't think I'll let you finish about that.
Yeah, I actually never took an economics class in college, and never really got interested in economics until later in life, when I started to become more of a libertarian, quite frankly, and started to read, Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson.
Oh, great book, yeah.
Which is a great book, and, just a bunch of other books that really talk about how our money system works and how the economy works. And it really made a lot of sense to me. I'm a programmer, so I like to know how things work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the more I learned about how things work, kind of the more interested I got in learning more about how the economy works. And, is Keynesian economics correct or not? I don't think it is.
Yeah.
And just those kind of ideas come to fruition in Bitcoin as this really interesting experiment in a very different economic model based on this, really hard money that's also global. So that's really interesting.
And a deflationary currency, which I was just talking to Robert Wenzel about this. He does the Economic Policy Journal. I've never seen a deflationary currency in my lifetime. I've always lived in the U.S. and I'm around 30, and I've always grown up with incentives to spend the money that I have, because it's going to be losing its value, and also to borrow, quite frankly, because when you repay that debt, it's going to be cheaper.
Right.
And I never really had strong incentives to save. And with Bitcoin, there are strong incentives to save, because it could be worth a lot more in the future, right? Some people may think of that as hoarding, but, you can also think of it as saving, right? As accumulating wealth that you maybe want to do something with later, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it is interesting. I'm paid in Bitcoin. So my salary is now paid by the Bitcoin Foundation.
Cool.
In Bitcoin. And, I don't spend all those Bitcoin right away, and so I'm rewarded for delaying gratification, right? Because Bitcoin tends to become more valuable over time, you kind of think twice about, do I really need that candy bar or whatever?
Yeah.
So
do I really need that 10,000 Bitcoin pizza? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And the the hoarding thing is interesting because there's another dynamic, which is, if you've been holding for a while, you kind of get free money, and so you're like, I had 10 Bitcoin, I had, a pizza worth of Bitcoins, now it's worth 2 pizzas, I might as well buy a pizza and I'll still have a pizza worth of Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think the whole system will work itself out.
The other interesting thing about that pizza, though, there's sort of a paradox there because that guy helped make Bitcoin what it is today. He helped legitimize it and make it known that it can be used as a medium of exchange. From what I've heard, he's not upset that he spent $10,000 on a pizza, right?
Well, I'm the guy who gave away 10,000
Yeah,
Bitcoins
that's right.
through the so, I've given away, $1.2 million worth of Bitcoins. And again,
that's amazing.
I don't regret it either, because if I hadn't have done that, it bootstraps the economy, and spending your coins makes any coins that you still hold more valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those two incentives to save and to spend are kind of balanced by both of those factors. So yeah, it's interesting to talk about that. So are you working on any other Bitcoin projects besides just the code, or is that taking up your whole time?
Right now, I am 100% on the core development, on the code, on being the chief scientist of the Bitcoin Foundation and thinking about what problems are we going to encounter next as Bitcoin gets, even more wildly popular.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what are the biggest problems on the plate? What do you think are going to be the next challenges?
Scalability, so scaling up to handle more transactions just requires some changes to the software that we're running, which is, scalability is a really good problem to have.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a big issue. I've been working on wallet security a lot. I think we need to make it much harder to either have your Bitcoins stolen or to lose your Bitcoins. So there's actually a lot of work on top of kind of the low-level Bitcoin to make that happen. A lot of user interface work just to make Bitcoin easier to use. So there's plenty to be done.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm not Satoshi.
No. Okay, we have you on the record for that. Where can people find you if they want to follow you on Twitter or just keep in touch with you? Where can they go?
I'm pretty easy to find. Gavin Andresen, @GavinAndresen is my Twitter handle. GavinAndresen@gmail.com is my email address. If you Google Gavin Andresen, you'll find out lots about me. So,
Does the Bitcoin faucet still exist?
I had to shut the Bitcoin faucet down.
Turn it off.
I turned it off because I didn't have time to work on the code to prevent the cheaters from cheating, unfortunately.
Yep, I gotcha. Okay, Gavin, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. Great to talk to you.
Starting a new cryptocurrency is easy. Finding adoption that'll make it successful, not so much. Peter Bushnell is the lead developer of Feathercoin, a new altchain launched early in 2013. With new coins coming out all the time, I sat down with Peter to find out what makes Feathercoin stand out. What makes it demand time and attention from those interested in cryptocurrencies over all the other options out there.
For myself, I kept waiting for a script coin to come out. Obviously, we have Litecoin, and I've always been a huge fan of Litecoin. I've had a lot of fun mining it in the past, from when it was very new still, and you could mine, several hundred coins a day with sort of very little effort. And as it's gone along, it's matured. You have Bitcoin, which is huge. It's got all the hash rate. You've got Litecoin, which is pretty much assured to ascend to Gox and become a great thing. It's already in place, and a lot of the challenge is gone. And I kept waiting for a new script coin to come along, and several did, but they weren't quite right in what they did. The kind of sort of niche coin I was looking for was simply a coin that continued what Litecoin started, a coin which had sort of 4 times more coins than the previous one. In my mind, it was sort of like the denomination of coins. So you got Bitcoin, 21 million coins, and you have Litecoin, 84 million coins, and that's, take it further, the copper, which is 4 times as many coins again. And I sort of saw a spot for that, because it's great having coins with great expense. But, some people like to deal in whole coins. With Feathercoin, you got lots of whole coins to deal with. I started in this as, a hobbyist, as an enthusiast. That's how I started mining. And for me, it was fun. It was fun to sort of get in and be challenged by the obstacles coins were faced. And these obstacles and challenges have sort of gone to an extent. And I sort of wanted to bring it back to the enthusiasm, of a new coin, the challenges that you face all over launching a new coin, which is pretty much what I've tried to do I mean, when I launched this coin, one of the things that went in a little blurb when I launched it was, let's have some fun. As well as trying to launch a coin that's going to, go out there and be able to compete, let's have a coin that the, enthusiasts can get a hold of. And a lot of people actually reacted negatively to that, which I thought was a bit sad, because it's got to do with money, so there's nothing fun in it. But no, there is. I mean, if you're a hobbyist, if you're just starting out, you're trying to mine some coins for joy, Feathercoin is the place for you. We're sort of very accepting of people. We have a really fantastic community that sort of embraces everybody who comes along. And there's a lot of people who are just starting out with this, who are sort of really rallied behind us. We have the long-standing members as well, which is sort of great to see, because these guys, sometimes it's hard to sort of get them to accept the new. But, we have such a varied community, and it's a lot of fun right now. This is what we wanted to do, is to recreate the spirit that we have with, a new venture, a new coin, to get everybody rallying together, to get everybody working on projects. And, there's so much going on. It's such an exciting thing to be part of. So I'm, really enthusiastic about what we're doing here.
So you said a couple of things there that I think make sense to me. You said as adoption has hit these other primary chains, like Bitcoin or Litecoin, it gets harder to mine. And so what you're saying is that Feathercoin was created initially because it brought the fun back into it, which means that it was easy to mine at the beginning when it wasn't worth very much because not many people were on it because it was a new coin. Is that right?
In part, it allows the miners to actually mine and get some coins. It seems a peculiar thing that, I mean, when I started looking at mining Bitcoin all that time ago, a year and a half or so, and I could mine, 0.1 Bitcoin a day, which seemed pretty unsatisfactory to me.
Right.
So for myself, I actually started mining Litecoin because I could mine 200 a day, and they weren't worth anything, But for me, it was a joy to mine these coins. They had some value, and I was going to start accruing these. I guess I was a speculative miner. It sort of certainly paid off, and the fact was that the Bitcoin community, there wasn't as much fun there for me. It was a lot harder to get in as somebody who had just come along into Litecoin. Litecoin was sort of new, everybody was keen, working on it, trying to develop services everywhere, trying to get merchant adoption, and it seemed like a much more fun crowd to be a part of. Fortunately, a lot of that seems to have gone, and to me, it's like, let's get that going again, which is what I've tried to do. So yeah, you can come to Feathercoin, you can mine more coins. The difficulty shouldn't be as high as it is, and it's coming down because we had such a rush at the beginning. So many people mined it. We got pushed up to a very high difficulty, which we're now slowly coming back from. It's taking a while. A few more difficulty changes under our belt, and we'll be ticking along nicely again.
I do want to get into the specifics of the changes that you have made because I think those are important to highlight. But I want to ask, are there any reasons besides the fact that it's easy to mine? Let's say we're 6 months down the road and it's just as hard to mine Feathercoin as it is to mine Litecoin. Is Feathercoin still fun to mine at that point? Or do you basically have to start another chain in order to be able to have fun?
No, not necessarily, but I wouldn't stop anybody from sort of launching additional coins in line with the ones that exist.
Yeah, I don't understand what the advantage is besides the mining part.
When I launched this coin, I certainly didn't want to make an experimental coin. I wanted to make a coin that could sort of last. There's lots of sort of features out there, with, like demurrage, where 5% of the coins disappear every year. I didn't want to include these features now because I wanted it to be experiment-free so it can last the test of time. What I want to do is I want to actively incorporate whatever features are out there that do sort of prove themselves. If there's a killer app, if there's a killer feature, we want to include that. I want to make Feathercoin so much more than it is right now. I think a lot of people just look at it and they see 4 times more coins. It doesn't offer much. It's not very exciting, and that's what we're working to change. I mean, when we got mined to a very high difficulty, the Litecoin difficulty adjust, which suits Litecoin great because it has a certain amount of hash power that they can take for granted, doesn't suit another smaller coin where the hash power will just sort of disappear. So, in that case, we hard forked. We came across a problem, we hard forked, and our difficulty actually changes 4 times more frequently than Litecoin, but just to 41.4% of the time, which makes it the same overall change per 2016 blocks. But we changed 504, but it just makes it more fine-grained. So if we come across a problem, we're not afraid to make changes for it. I mean, there's various things we're looking at in the client. We want to sort of implement, Feathercoin URLs. There's a URL on the screen. You click it, it opens the client, populates the amount, the address. These are things that Bitcoin has looked to implement in the past, but hasn't sort of been fully done. We're certainly looking to make the client more consumer friendly. The client, you see, the Qt client, hasn't really got the attention you might have hoped. I mean, Bitcoin's so big, and I'm not sure why the client is still so sort of banned. In our community, there's so many ideas coming back as what they want to see done with the client, and that's what we're working to implement. We're working to evolve this. I'm not sure how much Bitcoin can do in some ways. It's a mature project. There's so many people involved. If they make changes, it could be, well, it's difficult for them to implement them, roll them out, get them accepted. Yeah, no, Feathercoin, as it is, being a newer coin, I think it's much easier for us to sort of like evolve it. And that's certainly what we're looking to do, the amount of feedback we've got. I mean, we have a site set up as a user voice site, feedback.feathercoin.com. We're getting ideas coming in there, and we're looking to implement features. We're going out, we're engaging with sort of developers and whatnot to see what we can do. We want to grow this. We've got such great enthusiasm, and we're going to do something with it.
So there's a development team behind Feathercoin then. And basically what you're telling me is that the Feathercoin as it is right now is not the Feathercoin that will be in the future. So it makes sense to buy Feathercoin now because in the future it will be better and will have more advantages that will, essentially you're going to pick and choose from things that work and add those on to the existing kind of really basic structure of Feathercoin. Is that right?
Essentially, yeah, we're gonna cherry pick. I mean, if you see a fantastic idea, you'd be daft to sort of ignore it. Really, you see. But
that is the plan. That's the plan: is to actually innovate and to essentially take all these features and put them into Feathercoin, and through doing that, to make Feathercoin stand on its own, as opposed to being, the like you said, the copper to Litecoin silver.
We want to do so much more with this client. Certainly, we're hoping that some of the features that we implement, other people will use. There's been various attempts at some features over time which haven't worked out. We want to sort of take a look at those again, try them again, and then of course it's all open source, so everybody else can take our great ideas as well. But we want to be there. We want to be there first. I think we certainly fit. We complement Bitcoin and Litecoin. I think Litecoin has proved that there's room for more than one alt. A lot of people are just saying we only need one coin. That's not the way it's going to be. There's always going to be people want more than one option. You don't put all your eggs into one basket. The innovation comes from the other coins. I think you have to sort of try harder, and that's certainly what we're doing.
Is Feathercoin currently traded on any exchanges?
It is. The first exchange we went on to was Kryptonit, which is actually great news for us because we figured we'd end up on the smaller exchanges first, the unheard of ones. People had heard of Kryptonit. Then we went on to Virtual Currency Exchange, and now we're on to the Bitcoin Exchange, which is sort of the largest alternative cryptocurrency exchange out there. The only place to go from there is really onto, Mt. Gox. Right. that's a long way off. That's people are still waiting to see Litecoin get onto Mt. Gox.
Everyone knows that offline storage is the only safe way to store your Bitcoins. Now there's an easy, convenient, and secure way to make Bitcoin wallets for safe offline storage. With the Safe Paper Wallet Kit, you get everything you need to print Bitcoin wallets using your own PC. Store them in a safe deposit box, your home safe, or even your sock drawer. Anything's more secure than keeping them online. Get your kit now at safepaperwallet.com.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
So now, outside of Litecoin and Bitcoin, is there anybody else out there in the space that you think is really doing an altcoin that is, an impressive thing and that is absolutely doing it right?
I've always been very impressed with Sunny King. I'm not sure his real name or where he is or any details about him. But Sunny King, he's the chap behind PepeCoin. PepeCoin is the coin that implemented proof of stake. It's such a great idea. It's an idea that came up in the early days of Bitcoin where, rather than requiring miners to sort of create blocks, coins will create more blocks. Your coins will generate an additional 1% every year, which will generate coins, which means you don't need all the miners. And I thought that was a really novel idea. I think it still has to sort of prove itself, how practical it is, how worthwhile it is. But it's a great idea, and he's done a good service by bringing it out and allowing people to trial that.
Yeah, it's nice to see the innovation. So one of the things that is criticized a lot about altcoin chains, and I'm not sure what the situation is with Feathercoin, is that they're oftentimes pre-mined. And the argument that we usually hear about why they're pre-mined is because it's the, quote, only way to incentivize the development team to push forward, because otherwise miners would come in and own the whole thing, and then the development team has no stake in it. And so anyways, that's kind of the logic that we usually hear to justify pre-mining. Does Feathercoin pre-mine, and if so, why, and what's the thought process?
No, we do not pre-mine. We didn't pre-mine. I think pre-mine quite loosely now to refer to all sorts of things. Technically, a pre-mine is where you mine a coin before it's released to the public. So nobody else can mine it, and just a developer is mining it. That never happened. You can actually see where I announced Feathercoin. I made the post, said, here's Feathercoin, everybody, start mining it. And then if you take a look at the Blockchain Explorer, you can see that the first block was mined about a minute and a half before I made the post. Sorry, a minute and a half after I made the post. Sorry, I got that the wrong way around. Yeah, so no, I announced it, and then mining started after that point. So there was no technical pre-mine. The one criticism that people level and say is still a pre-mine in their minds, even though it's technically not, is the fact that the difficulty was set very low, which is something I wanted to have. I wanted to get a fair number of coins out there. But also, yes, I wanted to be able to mine a certain amount for myself relatively easily early on to use for bounties, which is exactly what I did. So I mined with a 7970 Radeon graphics card, which is a pretty decent single card. With that running, I managed to mine over the course of the next sort of 5 days 150,000 coins, which seemed like quite a substantial amount to me, all of which was given out on bounties. I was a Litecoin miner from back in the day. I have coins. I have sort of money to back me up if needs be. And these Feather coins, to me, it was a new coin. They didn't have any value. I wanted to work on getting them value. I certainly didn't expect them to get the value they did so quickly. Perhaps I wouldn't have given all 150,000 away if I'd have realized, But yeah, put these coins up for bounties, because when Feathercoin launched, there was still so much work to be done. We sort of needed website work. We needed graphics being doing. We needed to approach so many people, for stats pages, online calculators, explorers. So my idea was, let's get this bounty and then start paying people, which is what I did. And it was it made it incredibly popular, because so many people could take part, because I was sort of just giving away thousands of coins a time, and that really got people enthusiastic. Since then, I've changed over Litecoin to sort of buy back Feathercoin. Not as many as I'd have hoped. It was a couple of days after it was launched, I went out and I tried to buy 100,000 Feathercoins for 10 Bitcoin, which I thought was a phenomenal deal for a new coin. Yeah. And I thought it's been quite generous. And people came back to me with my offer of 10 Bitcoin. I said, no, we want 50 Bitcoin. So
high expectations.
But that was it. The price got pushed up and up and up, and it took me a while before I could finally, really buy back in. But I have some, in my wallet now, which I think is right. But it's taken a while. We're going to find our price point, because the price was just pushed up so high by these initial people, which is kind of why I was so keen to see it get onto an exchange in the first place, because I figured when it gets into an exchange, we'll get a fair price. And that's what's happened. Really, it's come down to a price that I think people can afford and can really get in at without worrying about risking too much. Right. I think a Bitcoin right now buys about 1,500. Bitcoin buys 1,500, which is a bargain if you ask me.
Fair enough. There are a lot of people out there who are interested in starting their own altcoin chains right now. Some of them have really innovative ideas. Some of them are like, it sounds like you started off as, looking for something that's more fun, aka easier to mine than the more mainstream chains are at this point. Top piece of advice you could give to them, what would it be?
I mean, really, you have to look for a niche, I think, even if nobody else sees it. That was, I went for 4 times more coins, because that's what I wanted in my head. So it's got to, if you're enthusiastic, you want to do this for some joy, it's got to be something that you want. It's got to be a niche that you see, that you can really get enthusiastic about. If anybody is going to listen to this and start up a new coin. My wish list for another coin is actually a new demurrage coin. Apologies to Freecoin there, but I'd love to see a script-based demurrage coin. That's sort of the gap I can see. I'm not going to launch that coin. I'm never going to launch another coin again. Feathercoin's enough. I'm behind that, but I would like to see a demurrage coin. So maybe somebody will hear that and take me up on it.
If somebody wants to get involved with Feathercoin, what's the URL and what's the procedure?
If you come to www.feathercoin.com, on there you'll see sort of various tools. If you come to the forums are a hotbed of activity. This is where we organize our teams basically, and you can see there's sort of teams for the pools, miners, tutorials. You got the artists are there. There's people working with exchanges. Merchant services is a very big thing right now. There's PR, gamer, musicians. We're really trying to pull in so many different people to look at so many different aspects. We need more people all the time. The forum itself just got over 1,000 members. We're not that old. We're in our infancy still, but we've grown so much. We're about to really sort of make a big push. This Zahemas, we're about to sort of start chasing a lot of merchants, services, seeing what we can provide, what people need. Because a lot of times you go to these merchants and they say, we'd love to support you, but we don't have certain tools. The guys on the forum, they're going out there, they're speaking to the merchants, they're finding out what the merchants want. They're relaying that, and then that's the sort of thing, we can work on providing. We're about to go with a press release. We're hitting sort of 8,000 radio stations, 8,000 newspapers, 1,000 online newspapers, just to sort of try and get the word out there. With merchant adoption, feedback is coming back for the need for, Feathercoin carts, for an API for merchants. They want the artwork. And our team is sort of busy creating all of this. And there's room for more people. If you come along and speak to myself or just a bit of time, we'll find work for you if you really want to jump in. But, just come along, check it out, see what we're up to. You can see we're busy. You can see we're very active. One criticism I heard the other day is that we're trying too hard. I didn't know you could try too hard. But anyway, we're really working hard to make this work for everybody.
I think there's a lot of suspicion about marketing right now. I mean, it seems like a lot of coins out there are built. Again, your coin now doesn't seem to have a tremendous number of advantages, but it does have active development. It does have active community, and you do have plans to develop it. So it's almost, it's weird because a lot of times when you think about like Bitcoin, for example, you're thinking, okay, this is Bitcoin. It's going to keep going up in price because of the deflationary aspects that, will play out over time. But you're not really looking at it. You're looking for services to be built on top of it, not for the core currency to change. And it sounds like what you've told me here is that is a incorrect assumption about Feathercoin. That Feathercoin will be changing, will be implementing new features as kind of time passes.
That's right. We want it to evolve. Certainly, I think we need to get more acceptance out there. We need to get more adoption right now before we do anything else. We just went through one hard fork. We don't want a hard fork again. But there's certain things we can do, and that's implement new features into the client, the Qt client. The Qt client is sort of very basic. That's the graphical user interface for the wallet. And there's so much work that can be done there that people are asking for, just to make it more of a consumer product. It's not particularly sort of friendly right now. It doesn't necessarily give you a lot of information either. Quite often I have all the information in the world in my sort of Bitcoin, Litecoin, Feathercoin client, but I still have to go to external sites to find out the information from that client, like the blockchain explorer. There's so much that can be brought down to stop people having to go elsewhere for information, and just to perhaps make it more aesthetically pleasing, even people like that.
Yeah. Well, Peter from Feathercoin, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Adam.
So in the last episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin, we talked about the idea of running Tor nodes and being compensated with Bitcoin. So that made me think of another project we're going to be talking with the principals of a little bit later in the month, OpenGarden, right? This is a mesh network. So right now, they don't have any monetization methods built in. And if you remember way back, and I think it was episode 3 or episode 4 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, I talked with Joe Cascio, who in our conversation mentioned that you could use automated Bitcoin payments, microtransactions of Bitcoin payments, to essentially pay for your internet service based on use rather than based on a flat fee. And so the way that he envisioned this was you'd have, a mesh network set up where there are people who run nodes, run routers essentially that provide internet connectivity to anybody within the transmission range of the thing. Rather than having to get a login and have an account, instead it would just be this protocol that says, okay, well, you want to use the internet, so here's your internet access in exchange for this, either on a per minute or per hour or per, bits of data, whatever rate that it was set up for on that local server. And it would be as simple as agreeing to the contract, and then as long as you're using the network based on whatever those metrics are, it would pay in. Now, one of the things that's been brought up about this is also another thing that's been talked about for Tor nodes, because Tor nodes are another one of those things where people provide it as a service, but because of the anonymity and because of that whole type of relationship, there's no way to monetize it. So the people who run nodes for Tor, which is a way that you can anonymously access parts of the internet and also anonymously access specific parts of the internet that are only available on that network. Sometimes it's called the dark net. Basically, it's hard to monetize that. This is not a solution to that problem, but it's a solution to a small part of it. The problem is that because Bitcoin has transaction times, there's no instant transaction. So if I want to use the internet and I'm trying to use one of these mesh network things in the scenario I've described, I have to wait like 5 minutes or 10 minutes for a confirmation or something like that. But what I was thinking is, what if you took it the other way? What if you extend the trust first, and then you say, okay, make this transaction now, but then as soon as the transaction has been made, whether or not it's confirmed, you just give access. And then, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, when the transaction, confirms, then you say, okay, good, you can keep having access based on this relationship that we've now developed. But even if the transaction comes back and it's declined and says, no, that didn't actually happen or it was fake or whatever, then you just cut off access at that point and there's no real loss to you. But you've solved this usability problem that exists right now where you can't do these things in other senses. Now, this wouldn't work with a cup of coffee, but for something like running a Tor node or running a Wi-Fi node where currently there's no way to monetize it, this actually seems like it could be a way to trust but verify, in the words of Reagan. Am I missing something obvious here?
I just love that you just quoted Reagan. I mean, that was kind of out of the blue.
I was thinking about that too.
But no, I think you're absolutely right. The opportunities for monetization are rather interesting. And it's very different if you're looking at a predominantly anonymous and designed for anonymity and deniability and privacy network like Tor, versus an open mesh network which is geographically focused. Like if I'm sharing my Wi-Fi, there's no question about who I am and where I am, because you have to be within 300 feet of my location to use it. So, so from that perspective, there's opportunities to do other interesting things when you don't care about anonymity. And that is, you can build reputation systems. So you can extend me a megabyte of data transfer and then have me pay it later. And if I'm being an ass and I don't pay for it, you'll know. So will the rest of the network. Or rather, if I'm good and I pay for it, you'll know. And so will the rest of the network. And so as a result, I can gradually build trust and reputation just by paying my bandwidth bills that are extended to me. And as long as I keep paying those, I build more and more trust, which can extend me more and more bandwidth. So there's some really nice mechanisms there that can also use reputation and previous payment history to build a lot of momentum behind this.
It's not even really about anonymity, since your name could be a Bitcoin address. It doesn't really matter what you're attaching the reputation to. It only matters that whatever it is has reputation.
Well, yes, but what you're doing is associating previous sessions to future sessions, because you need to repeat that for your trust account for your next session. And what that does is it taints each of your bandwidth sessions with the identity of the previous one. Even if that is a pseudonymous identity, you couldn't do that on Tor. It would break the entire model. It would mean that everything could be traced back to the first time you paid, because your reputation would be like a cookie that taints every transaction and tracks you forward.
Well, it just sounds like in some situations you don't want reputation. It sounds like in some situations like the Tor one, where anonymity is in fact the goal, their reputation is anathema to that.
So for those, you would really do something like what you discussed, more charging on the honor basis, with the understanding that if you extend bandwidth that's not paid for, it's not a huge loss as long as you don't do it too often.
I'm trying to think of ways that somebody could game that system potentially. And one of the ways that I thought of was jumping on until they get kicked off and then signing on as a different identity while they're waiting to get verified and so forth. And I don't know how that could be prevented. I also don't know if there's anything malicious they could potentially do in that time that they're on, or perhaps, they only need 10 minutes to do whatever they're going to do, whatever nefarious thing that they're going to do. They only need 10 minutes of access to whatever network it is to do it. Maybe those could be some concerns.
Compare it to the current state of a network like Tor, where essentially that's all that's happening. So essentially you never know. There is no cutoff. Everyone's anonymous. Everyone's using the bandwidth for free. What is today the norm becomes an edge case if you have a level of monetization. And I wouldn't worry about it. If you can take the norm and the most abusive behavior and turn it into an edge case, you're good, because the rest of the monetization opportunity you've opened up creates all kinds of incentives for creating more Tor nodes, which basically solves the problem.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And further to that point, I would actually say that you could turn it around and say, well, actually, if someone just has to do 10 minutes worth of stuff on, whether it be a Wi-Fi network or not, it seems like so long as, Andreas, as you said, that becomes an edge case and most users are participating, because there's no real disadvantage to not participating. If you're talking about a couple of cents per minute or however you wanted to do it, by making it really granular, you can make it very inexpensive and quite reasonable, actually. And again, because you're taking models that have no monetization in them at all and adding a way for it to be easy and to opt into that monetization and providing some sort of stick. I mean, because ultimately right now, with that free access, you don't get kicked off. But with this, you'd get kicked off if after the 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever of the grace period where the transaction is expected to go through. Then if it doesn't go through, then you just kick them off at the end of that. It seems like, yeah. So I'm repeating what you said, Andreas. I think I agree.
Perhaps there's some advertising built in there too during that grace period or whatever. So at least if the person doesn't pay, then they've been exposed to whatever ad has been shown to them or whatever.
I think, yeah, like a custom landing page could work. I think that you can go too far in that direction. When we were at Bitcoin 2013, I was on Marriott's Wi-Fi, Hilton's Wi-Fi, and those are fairly onerous systems for the complimentary quote-unquote access. And even then,
it was provided by Mt. Gox.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that.
I'm sorry. That was a mean joke. I just should clarify that. So I stayed at the Marriott during Bitcoin 2013, and there was a paper at the front desk that said complimentary internet provided by Mt. Gox. And my partner and I looked at each other and said, okay, so it's going to be down a lot over the weekend, I guess. But no, they did provide complimentary internet, and that was very nice. I appreciate that.
Yes.
I like your idea about advertising, and you could make some great incentives like that. So if you use it for 10 minutes and you don't pay, you get Justin Bieber ads injected into your stream, at which point you go, I'll pay, make it stop.
Oh God, stop.
So there's a new player in town that's talking about mining equipment that performs at a very high level. This is, again, continuing this thread of mining innovation that we've seen over the last 6 months really start to kick in, and lots of new ASIC manufacturers coming out. So there's a new one called Cryonics, spelled Cryoniks, that has a line coming out called the Bit line, I believe, and their first one is the Frost Bit. We're not actually recommending that you buy these or look at them seriously. There's actually...
But we do have a bridge to sell you if you are thinking about purchasing one of those.
Yeah. I mean, this is, we talk about shining examples and horrible warnings periodically on this show, and this is one that is still up in the air, but it really has all the makings to be a horrible warning. They've got hardware that seems to defy physics, that, doesn't actually exist yet, but they have nice mock-ups on it, great looking boxes with fans in it. It's fairly expensive. They're offering free shipping. Of course, the product doesn't exist yet, and so that's one of those hallmarks. More than anything else, it looks like the company that's behind it actually 2 years ago launched a Kickstarter. Not a similar product. It was also a hardware product. It was a USB device that was secured in a mechanical lock. And so, it's kind of this cool looking thing, kind of looks like a Da Vinci Code type thing, and walked away with $200,000. So There's a real temptation in this community right now to look at these things, to look at new products coming out and say, wow, that's really great, I'd like to invest in that. But there needs to be some skepticism applied. So we're putting on our skeptical hats here. We're going to take a little bit of a look at it. Stephanie, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I try to keep my skeptical hat firmly attached to my head at all times, and this one is no different. There's actually an expose on Reddit by a person named Hack8or. He or she goes through and debunks point by point some of the things that were in the Kickstarter for this Frostbit thing. One of them is that it claims to use liquid nitrogen to cool the chips that they use, but to keep nitrogen liquid, and that's at, minus 80 degrees Celsius approximately, that requires a really fancy compressor and a lot of power, which this does not appear to have in this box with fans in it. So that was a pretty eyebrow-raising point, I would say. There's also a couple of other things that are pretty shady about this. They say on the FAQ for this Kickstarter that they'll be selling upgrades that will enable you to use it to mine Litecoin, process video, and do other things with it. But ASIC circuits are application-specific integrated circuits, right? They're designed for something incredibly specific, and the script algorithm, which is what Litecoin is mined on, is very different than the SHA-256 algorithm, which is what Bitcoin is mined on. So really, it seems like you would need completely different chips to do those different applications. ASICs are not really designed to be fungible like that. So this looks very sketchy. It seems like they're just kind of telling people what they would like to hear, and if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is.
Bitcoin is the ultimate non-reversible transaction, and so caveat emptor, buyer beware, is a prime principle when transacting in Bitcoins. I have been inspired by this to release my new product called the Perpetua Miner. And what it does is it takes the heat output of your mining rig, and using a Stirling engine, it uses it to power the rig itself. And as a result, cuts your electricity costs by 100%, and you only need power to start it, and then you can unplug it, and it will then run on its own heat. So this is Perpetua Miner coming soon, and I'll be selling those, of course, on pre-order for Bitcoin without refunds.
How much are you charging for those, Andreas?
I don't know. It depends how greedy I'm feeling that day. Maybe a couple hundred Bitcoin to start with. Yeah. I'm going to get a really good designer to make a very fancy box with blue lights, because blue is in. And red
blue is
out.
fast. Blue means fast. Let's keep that in mind.
And cold, chilly. Yes. Yeah, yes. Absolutely. So, yeah, it's going to come in a fantastic box that's being designed by one of the designers of the Maserati. And it's streamlined so it can mine fast. It's very aerodynamic. And once you get it and realize it doesn't work, when you throw it out your window, it will go very far.
We should mention this is a developing story, and it looks like BTCBible.com has a story up about it now, and they're in communication with the principals at the company trying to figure out if this is real or not. So there will be an update in a future episode talking about this. But it's important to recognize that even if this is real, there are so many claims being made, and so many of these things, even in the case of Butterfly Labs, even if you're assuming that they're not a bad actor and that they really did have good intentions with all the ways that they've gone about doing things and releasing their ASIC models, you can still just see that assumptions that are made at the beginning of the manufacturing process, a lot of times by the time you get to the end, are just wrong. And when you've sold units and made promises based on those initial assumptions, it's just a bad situation in general where even if you do deliver the product, you still have failed as far as your customers are concerned, because they didn't get what they expected because it changed.
BTC Bible has been in touch with the CEO of Cryonics and has requested a tester unit. They say they are going to donate any proceeds from the testing to Sean's Outpost, which is a Bitcoin-based homeless advocacy charity, which I think is great. I like to see mining test proceeds going to Bitcoin charities. So I'm curious to see if they ever receive it and how it turns out.
As Saint Satoshi said, trust but verify.
Want to set up an online store that accepts Bitcoins? Go to openbitcoinstore.com and you can have a store up and running before the end of this message. Just enter your email address and the store name, and in less than 30 seconds, you'll have a secure WordPress e-commerce site up and running that accepts Bitcoins and pays you in cash within 24 hours. And best of all, it's completely free. Go to openbitcoinstore.com today and open for business now.
Let's Talk Bitcoin is heard each week by thousands of people who are participating in the new digital economy. Our listener base of Bitcoin owners, miners, investors, technologists, and merchants is growing fast. We offer a limited number of short advertising slots in each show to keep our listeners engaged and to provide maximum impact for our sponsors. If you'd like to talk to us about Let's Talk Bitcoin, send us an email at sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com. True Bitcoin microtransactions have been on my mind for the last few weeks, and while Bitcoin certainly shows promise for enabling commerce in ways never before possible, at this early point in development, there are still some major problems. Fees are based on a per-transaction basis, and so very small transactions can have outsized fees, which brings us back to the PayPal problem. Fees too high to justify the transaction in the first place. Listener Justice wrote in after our last episode to tell me about microbilling, a proposed technique to create a transaction fee-reduced, pay-as-you-go billing solution for, well, lots of things. To help me fill in the blanks, Alan Reiner joins me this morning. Alan, how are you doing?
Hey, doing great.
You know, I've been reading through this thread on Bitcoin Talk from about a month ago. It's called Rapidly Adjusted Micropayments and Multisig/P2SH. What does P2SH mean? That's the one thing in there I don't know.
Yeah, P2SH is a mechanism that was introduced to the network about a year ago. It's really not all that. It's kind of a deeper technical meaning, but the idea is that it makes it a lot easier for parties to execute multi-signature transactions and actually more complicated things that you could do on the network, but otherwise might be bulky or inconvenient. P2SH is, generally speaking, you can just associate that with multi-signature transactions.
Basically, rapidly adjusting micropayments and multi-signature transactions. And so, like I said, the problem is that as you get down to these really, really, really small transaction levels, like one of the examples we've been talking about on the show is if you had like a mesh network, router nodes that were providing these localized internet connections, able to be compensated on like a per kilobyte or per minute or per second even rate, that doesn't really make sense to have a transaction going every time that pings because the transaction fees are too high. So it seems like that's the sort of situation that this technique aims to solve. Can you explain how that works?
There's actually another reason why that's infeasible, which is the way the network works. All transactions basically take 10 to 60 minutes for you to get some kind of confidence that the transaction actually happened. And it doesn't matter whether that transaction is for a tenth of a Bitcoin or for 1 million Bitcoins. It's still going to take the same amount of time for the network to reach consensus that that actually happened. And while this works very well, in general, it's okay for online ordering, for major settlement transactions between companies and so forth, and there's a lot of places where it does work. It really does inhibit this microtransaction concept because you're not only paying a fee, which normally is small but is big relative to these microtransactions, but you also can't rely on sending lots of these microtransactions every minute because you need time for those to converge in the network. The network isn't well suited in its, I guess, simplest form for these microtransactions. But using the stuff that you referenced, the rapidly adjusted micropayments, you're using an extension of Bitcoin that allows you to use some of the deeper features of the network. We mentioned P2SH and multi-signature transactions to basically create one transaction using the network as escrow and then revising that transaction over and over again before it actually hits the network. The nice thing about it is that both parties can see that this transaction that you're doing is valid. They have confidence that this transaction would go through if it was broadcast, and all you're doing is you're revising that before it gets broadcast, meaning before it's finalized. And that's very cheap. I mean, you're just sending them basically 200 bytes of data, which is very small in the grand scheme of things. And each one is very cheap for them to verify, to see that it's valid. So you can keep revising this, say, every second, every minute, every kilobyte, whatever you want, and they can have confidence that the last revision is valid.
both parties, both the one that's buying and the one that's selling, like you could call it like electricity or something like that. If you're talking about paying for electricity on like a kilowatt hour level instead of paying for it at the end of the month. At the beginning of the relationship, you set up a contractual relationship through this system that says that's shoot, I'm doing a bad job of trying to simplify this.
Here, I'll give you a good analogy for it.
Please do.
Let's say I go to the bank and I try to execute a wire transfer. And this is kind of a weird wire because it's actually going to two people. But I go to the bank and say, I'd like to transfer $20, and I'd like 10 of that to be wired to you and 10 of that to be wired to my other account.
Okay.
And that I want that wire to go through in the next 5 days. Okay. So they're going to charge me a fee for that wire. And, it's not frictionless. It takes time. But in the next 5 days, I can call the bank and say, hey, you know what? Actually, why don't you send Adam $11 and send me $9 instead? Just change the numbers on that wire. They can do that. The wire hasn't actually gone through yet. I haven't been charged a fee. All I've done is I've revised that. So if I want to give you another dollar, I just send another message to the bank that says, hey, actually, can you revise that before it goes through and send him 12 and me 8? Otherwise, each one of those transactions for $1 would be, getting sent over the wire and assessed a fee and take time. But by doing it this way, you can instantaneously just change the numbers with your authorization, and the rest of the network doesn't have to see that.
The bank that we're talking about that would actually be conducting this is the blockchain?
The bank is the network.
The bank is the network.
Essentially holding your $20 and saying that it's going to send it on in the next 5 days.
Okay.
But it's not finalized yet, and you have a chance to revise it before it actually goes out. And in this case, the bank is allowing you to revise it without actually charging you for it.
Okay. And so in the system we're talking about, you've got the person who's doing the purchasing, you've got the person or the organization or whatever that's doing the selling, and then they're basically just negotiating with each other. They've already got this agreement, and it's just the difference is the quantity that each one will be sending versus receiving. And then at the point that it's finalized, it's broadcast to the broader Bitcoin network as one transaction based on whatever the final settlement was. Is that right?
That's correct. And just for reference, it can go both ways. If now you owe me $5, I can call the bank and say, hey, let's revise it again and send Adam $8 and me $12.
So what if I disagree with that? I mean, how does that work? Is this entirely based on rules where it's all set in advance?
In that case, the analogy is falling apart because you would need your authorization on that too. And the analogy isn't perfect in that case. But on the Bitcoin network, the release of that money, it does require both my authorization and your authorization. And when I decide I want to give you money, I sign a new version of the transaction that's favorable to you. And when you want to give me money, you sign a new version of the transaction that's favorable to me. Whoever's got that last version can sign it and broadcast it.
When you're saying the last version, you mean the last version that's preferable to both parties?
Each time you issue one of these revisions, that supersedes all the previous ones. Okay. And the network is capable of recognizing that one transaction came after the other. And it's got rules in place to say, to be able to recognize which one is the last one. If you try to broadcast the last one that's favorable to you, but not the actual last one, then I can broadcast the last one, which I'd probably be doing anyway, and the network would say, oh, that one is the correct one.
So one of the interesting parts about this that I originally, when I was reading it, thought was kind of onerous, but now it's starting to make a little sense to me, is that this relationship requires essentially collateral being put at risk by both parties. So even if you're in this relationship where, you're buying power from the power company, in order to make this work in a way where everybody is incentivized to play by the rules, both sides wind up putting up collaterals. Can you explain the thought process behind that?
I mean, there's multiple ways to do it. And if you're going to have a two-way relationship where I might be giving you money and you might be giving me money, then yes, both sides have to put money in. But one of the nice things about this technique, the rapidly adjusted micropayments, is that from the moment that the contract is started, that relationship is initiated, even if both parties died or lost their keys or whatever, the transaction will complete. The last revision will be accepted by the network and everything will be returned. So I put in $20 into this transaction. I should be using Bitcoins. I put 20 Bitcoins into this agreement. And the way that we do this kind of dance with signing transactions and agreeing on how they look and how it works. If we do nothing else, that $20 is just going to come back to me. It's only if we decide to move more money, to exchange money, that we would revise that. But luckily, the way it's set up, there's not actually a risk of someone losing money there, as long as the dance is done properly. I mean, there's a bit of communication that the clients have to do to set this up. And it may involve both sides putting money in, but the outcome is the same, which is that money is always going to go back to the two parties. You've ensured that by the way that you've set up the transactions.
When we talked last time, we talked about multi-signature transactions, and we talked about how that was something that's going to be making its way into Armory over the next months and year, I suppose, in a variety of forms. Is this the sort of thing that will wind up in a client like Armory, or is this something that's entirely separate?
This is something I'd really like to support, but the complexities of it are going to require some care to technically implement it correctly, and also, make an interface that's reasonable. But it is something that I'd really like to see. For instance, one of the applications of it, which is one of my favorite applications, is if you've ever spent a lot of time looking at say, New York Times, you'll find that you'll hit your 10-page limit. I think it's New York Times. You hit a 10-page limit, and then it says, oh, you can't browse anymore unless you pay for a subscription. You browse news every day, and you don't mind setting up an account with the New York Times, and they can literally charge you per page that you view or per article. And they don't have to charge you a lot. It could be 1 cent per page. And the nice thing is that these revised versions of this transaction can be sent along with the page request. So when you say, I want to view this article, when you send that request for that article, you also send them the revision to the transaction that sends them 1 more penny. It's as secure as it can get.
So what's the downside?
Well, the downside is that this doesn't, I guess it's not a downside, it's more of a limitation. The situations in which this is applicable requires two parties that have a persistent relationship with each other. In this case, you are initiating a relationship with the New York Times, and that's a persistent relationship. It's not like going on eBay, finding someone and you do a one-time transaction. This wouldn't be a very useful mechanism for one-use transactions between two untrusted parties. The idea is that if you're going to be doing lots of transactions, especially lots of very small interchanges with someone, then this works, and it works very, very well. But it's not the kind of thing where you can send 100 different people a penny once. There is no benefit there. In that case, you'd have to send out 100 transactions and pay the fees on those.
It seems to me like it turns the transactions from being about the transactions instead of being about the number of recipients. Because if you can take any arbitrary number of transactions and essentially reckon them into a single transaction, then the only limitation is how many people you're sending it to.
That's actually very accurate. And for reference, it's actually 2 transactions. There's the initial transaction, which puts the money into the escrow, into the network, and then the last transaction is the last revision. So the relationship takes one transaction to set up and 1 to settle.
In this scenario with the New York Times, do I have to trust the New York Times, or is the relationship pretty much just on autopilot based on our initial agreement?
No, you don't have to trust the New York Times. There's been a little bit of debate about how things could possibly go wrong if there's... I shouldn't even mention it because it's pretty remote, but I mean, there's a little bit of dispute of whether it's truly 100% trustless or just very, very close to trustless. It does share that property that you don't have to trust the other person. No matter what they do, you can always broadcast the last version of the transaction, and that's going to settle the balance, and there's nothing the other party can do to compromise that.
Alan, I don't actually know. I didn't actually see any posts from you in this thread. How up on this are you? I mean, is this something you've been working on?
I'm intellectually in touch with it. I mean, it's something that I really like the concept, and I look forward to doing it one day in Armory, but it's not my highest priority. Just getting regular multi-sig integrated is one of my high priorities, and then this can kind of follow after that. The issue is that multi-signature transactions by themselves are going to have quite a bit of implementation complexity and making it usable to regular people. Implementing this would be even more so. So it's not the first step. It's a couple steps down the line, and there's a lot to do before that. But it's something absolutely that I want to enable and find a way to make it accessible, because it is actually a very powerful tool in the Bitcoin tool set.
You talked about the difficulties and just the complexity. Is there anything in particular that is just a problem that needs to be solved that is holding up this type of development? Or is it more just there are so many things, and just somebody needs to throw a lot of time at it?
It's more the latter of what you said. It's a matter of resources and people who have the background and the knowledge to understand how it works technically under the hood and to actually implement it into an environment that it makes sense. I think there's a lot of people who understand this and could, theoretically write some scripts, find ways to use it on their own, but actually producing a solution in a piece of wallet software like Armory or Bitcoin QT with an interface that doesn't require understanding the guts of the protocol, that's going to be difficult. And in order to implement that, you just need the resources of people who are in tune with the technical side of Bitcoin and with software where it could go into. There's a lot of neat and ugly aspects of it under the hood, but at a high level view, the way that I guess, quote, regular users would be accessing this, that's what they need to know. It does allow you to set up this relationship, and you can do so trustlessly. It is one of these, I don't want to call it a solution, but it's something that really benefits the network. People complain about the high transaction volume and is it going to scale? Well, this is something that really brings down that transaction volume, and it doesn't have to be hard to use, but it's going to take some time before it gets there.
Alan Reiner, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam.
Thanks for tuning into episode 15 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Whether you liked, loved, or hated the show, we want to know what you think. Please send all comments, questions, or offers to help to mail@letstalkbitcoin.com. If you like what we're doing and want to support us with Bitcoin or Litecoin donations, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com for episode-specific addresses. If you've got a question you'd like answered on air, call us at 1-855-WE-TALK-BITCOIN. Thanks to Andreas M. Antonopoulos, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, Thomas O'Brien, Michael Megan, Peter Bushnell, Gavin Andreessen, and Alan Reiner for providing content for this episode. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens. For more information about the music we use and the open source artists who create it, please visit www.letstalkbitcoin.com/music. Stay tuned for episode 16, coming up on Friday the 14th of June, featuring more discussion and interviews. Thanks for listening.